The caterpillar has the DNA to transform into the butterfly. So it's already encoded. So it's part of its nature. So it's got the potential and then it's actualized. Whereas a male is a male. It doesn't matter what kind of surgery you do on a male or a female,
Mm.
there's no potentiality that can be actualized. And that's fundamentally the issue. And it's an issue about truth and logic and science.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Freedom Feature. I'm your host, Barry Bussey. With me today, I have Scott Ventureyra. I don't know, Scott, if I mispronounced your name or not, but you can help me. It's great to have you with us.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Barry. It's an honor to be on your show.
Tell me, Scott, I'm very interested in your project. You've got True Freedom Press, and I'm just wondering if you could just share with us, first of all, a little bit about who you are and what got you so interested in starting up another press.
Right. I'll give a little bit of a background for your audience as to who I am. So, I'm an academic, I'm an author, and an editor. I have degrees in economics and theology. My PhD is in philosophical theology. So, it involves a lot of philosophy. And the focus of my academic work has been in the science and theology interaction, the philosophy of religion, and also the philosophy of science and consciousness studies. So I
Mm.
presented my research at the Science of Consciousness, which is based out of the University of Arizona, which was started by people like Stuart Hameroff and David Chalmers. And so my first book, which was based on my dissertation, was published in 2018 with an American publishing house. And it was titled On the Origin of Consciousness.
Mm.
So this book interweaves philosophy, science, and theology. And it focuses and it owns in on the notion of how consciousness could have originated in the universe.
Mm.
And right now, I'm currently also working on another book about Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. For people in the audience that might not be familiar, he's a controversial Catholic priest who lived from 1881 until 1955. He was also a paleontologist and a theologian. So he had this kind of evolutionary theology, you could call it. He's also one of the
Mm.
progenitors of the idea of transhumanism. So I'm working on a book specifically on his thought. I've devoted chapter 4 on the origin of consciousness specifically to his thought. So it's about, I believe, like close to 60 pages. So the book is going to be titled Why Teilhard Matters. So it's going to be critical, but it's going to give praise when praise is due, and then to give criticisms when they're warranted as well. And so he was a Jesuit priest, so he was quite controversial during his lifetime. He was rejected for his heterodox views in the Catholic Church, but then later on, he's been embraced almost uncritically by specifically Catholic theologians and some Catholic scientists as well.
So tell me, I mean, this is the first I've heard of this, but what is it about transhumanism? We think of transhumanism today with the modern technology and so on, but also there's a lot of concern out there right now with transhumanism. How is it that he started this?
So he had some ideas, I believe, in some of the writings in the 1930s and 40s, where he kind of envisioned a step forward for humanity, kind of like a human 2.0. He envisioned the merging of the electronic. I mean, the AI was not known back then, obviously. And so he
Right.
envisioned like a hybrid between a human and a robot, like a cyborg type thing. C.S. Lewis also envisioned certain things like this, but he didn't really think it was a good idea. But Teilhard kind of follows into it with his evolutionary theology, and he tries to suggest that this could be a step forward in God's plan. I mean, it was quite controversial. So I'm still doing some research on that, but it's going to be quite critical on those aspects of his theology.
So, what do you see as the problem with that theology?
It fundamentally changes what it means to be human,
Mm.
and the whole idea of the Imago Dei, that
Mm.
we're created in the image and likeness of God. So I think that fundamentally shifts it to something very different than what we see in the scriptures and what we were meant to be as humans that worship God. So I think it's a fundamental break in the Imago Dei, and so it's very heterodox in my view.
With transhumanism, I see it as wanting to replace God. It's the idea that, in a way, the human being is God and will redefine what it means to be a human based on the self.
Right. So if you've listened to Yuval Noah Harari,
Mm.
he gets into this. He's big into the transhumanism, and he will suggest that now that we've awakened with our consciousness, so now it's the idea that we're the ones that have created God. So now,
Mm.
not only are we the ones that create God or the notion of God, we're also the ones that create God in our own image as well. But we also partake in creation, so we fundamentally shift evolutionary trajectory humanity based on intelligent design, not in the traditional sense, but in the sense of tinkering with the human person.
And the intelligence is not divine intelligence, but human intelligence.
That's correct. Yes, or it could even be extraterrestrial. For some, might speculate as such, and maybe Christians would, could speculate that maybe this has a demonic influence as well,
Mm.
which I think we can see some connections with the with some of the AI with ChatGPT. I was watching an interview with a priest on the Michael Knowles show. Apparently, he had conversed with a parent that the child had been involved heavily chatting with ChatGPT, and apparently, the ChatGPT was responding in a form that was kind of relaying that it was demonic.
Oh, my.
I don't know about the veracity of it, but so this was a conversation ensued on the Michael Knowles show, which I found quite interesting. Leads to the question is, can a demonic, the spiritual, interact with the informational, like the AI? Is that a possibility? And is that what's actually happening in some of these instances? It's an open question in my mind.
The name of this priest that you're studying, what's his name again?
Pierre Teilhard de Chardin.
And his writings, you're saying, is now being accepted by a number of different theologians?
Yeah, well, he wrote a lot on ecology and a lot of technological aspects, and he even wrote on Marxism. So some of these ideas have been fully embraced. Some of the ideas can be useful. I think some of his evolutionary ideas gear more to Jean-Baptiste Lamarck as opposed to Charles Darwin for his evolutionary ideas. And so I found that kind of interesting because some of the ideas of Lamarck, I think, function better with even a sort of creationism or an evolutionary creationism or intelligent design, where there's kind of an impetus to evolution as opposed to more of a randomness with the variations in Darwinism, with natural selection weeding out, the mutations and selecting for the ones that are beneficial. So this is less random. It's a non-random process in my mind. So there was interesting ideas that I explore in that avenue. But I think for the most part, a lot of his thought is quite heterodox, where it seems like he elevated evolution to such a level. And I mentioned this in a couple of articles I've written about him, that God even has to bow down to evolution. So he idolizes evolution. And so I find it kind of bizarre how so many theologians have latched on, and some of them might criticize me saying that I'm overreaching or maybe I'm being too critical or I'm misunderstanding him. But I mean, if I read the text correctly, I think these are the implications. And, there's been some critics that have been quite thorough in their critique of Teilhard de Chardin, like Wolfgang Schmidt. I wrote a lengthy review of one of his books that criticizes Teilhard de Chardin. I appreciate some of his thought, some of the aspects of evolutionary theory that he tries to encompass with theology or incorporate with theology. But I have to be critical of the heterodox ideas. And so either way, I find him fascinating.
Mm.
And he's been one of the greatest figures in Catholic theology of the past century. So there's countless books that have been written about him and articles.
And his influence on transhumanism today, you think, is quite wide.
Well, he's acknowledged. He's acknowledged as being one of the progenitors of the idea of transhumanism. There was an article that was published, I believe, in the late 90s that makes the explicit connection. So he's acknowledged as having a great influence, at least in the early stages of transhumanism. When I actually went to the conference in 2016 in Tucson, Arizona for the science of consciousness, I actually met a scientist, but I don't know if he had the credentials as a scientist. He was, kind of a armchair physicist, you could
Mm.
say. His name's Clee Irwin, and he founded Singularity University with Ray Kurzweil. Interestingly, he had never heard of Teilhard de Chardin. We had about a 3 hour discussion after one of my presentations, so it was quite fascinating. So Clee Irwin has kind of some similar ideas to Teilhard de Chardin, but they're even more bizarre because he thinks that the pinnacle of evolution will lead us to creating God, or the impetus of evolution leads to this maximal consciousness. And this maximal consciousness can create retroactively, which is a very bizarre notion. I mean, Klee, I believe, is an atheist, same with Ray Kurzweil. But it was interesting to find out that Klee Irwin had founded the Singularity University. So it's a mix mash, right, in terms of how widespread it is, his influence. But he is recognized in most circles as being one of the first to kind of introduce this idea of transhumanism, of this kind of the cyborg idea of the merging of technology with humanity. Obviously, it looks much different now in the present.
So I guess my concern with this whole transhumanism project is the individual freedom that we have come to understand and experience in the West, and I would suggest has been one of the great motivating factors for us as a society to have advanced as far as we have. How do you see the effect of transhumanism on human freedom?
I honestly believe that it will remove any meaningful type of free will.
Mm.
And the thing is, to what extent are humans going to be connected to AI? I mean, we're already seeing transhumanism in the most basic sense with our technology, in the sense that our phones are extensions of our hands,
Mm.
if we think about it, right? And the influence of the internet and all these things, it's already here. Transhumanism is already here. It's been here for a while. I think we're already losing elements of free will in terms of engagement with social media and different platforms. We're losing a sense of the self, and it's as if we're getting lost in these collective consciousnesses, if you will. And one of the things that I found fascinating throughout the past 3 years is how divisive social media has become.
Mm.
With the so-called freedom fighters, the COVIDians that follow COVID hysteria to a T, right? And so it's as if we live in two separate worlds.
Mm.
And so I think, the AI and the algorithms on Facebook and Twitter, that show us the material that we're looking for more often than not, has created an immense division among our fellow humans. And so I see the influence already there, and there is a loss of free will unless we start to take a step back and we have that awareness. But I think that most people do not have that awareness, and especially the youth that are obsessed with TikTok and all these different platforms, their minds are being numbed and dumbed down, and so they're more susceptible to things like mind control tactics. And so I think there is already a gradual erosion of free will that's happening right before our eyes.
Right. And from your study of transhumanism, where is it they're going? I mean, you mentioned the idea of creating this God, but what would what are some of the thoughts out there? I mean, I'm going down a little bit of a trail here that I don't even know what to expect. I mean, I've been hearing about transhumanism, I've been hearing about, the chatbots and all the rest of it. But from your study, and the thing I like, Scott, about what you're doing is that you're going deep. You're not just looking at the practical side of things, which are the things that I am interested in knowing where you think we may end up being or what humanity might look like. But there's also the idea that's behind this. that you are digging in deeply. And I think we all owe you a debt of gratitude to take the time to get into it, because most of us are busy about our lives, doing our own thing. And yeah, we hear about it, but we're really not paying attention. Let's have a look at it. Where do you see us
Well,
going?
well, one of the things that I studied a couple of years ago, about 2.5 years ago, I was preparing for a presentation that was actually online for the science of consciousness. And I just posted it on Rumble today and a few days ago, maybe a week ago or so, on YouTube, about a 20-minute presentation. And I look at, the connection between information systems and AI and the nature of reality and how that connects to the afterlife. Because as we're looking at this whole influence of AI and the ideas of Ray Kurzweil with the singularity, where technology merges at this pinnacle with humanity, and then humanity starts to evolve into a different trajectory. There's a lot of talk about uploading the data of our brains into computer systems, AI systems, and to me, I come to the conclusion that this would fundamentally alter not only our definition of the afterlife, I get into that in the presentation, but also the definition of not only what it means to be human, but if you're able to download somehow, which I don't even think we have the technology at this point, to download or upload data from our brains, or what they would want to say is our mind, which would be a separate thing from the brain in my estimation, into some quantum computing, the nebulous of interconnections, electronic interconnections, that would cease to be the person that you are, obviously. Even if it had, all the information about your personality and all your memories and whatnot, it would not be you anymore. Whatever that information system or whatever copy of yourself could emerge would have no free will at that point and would be controlled by whatever system could be running that programming. So there would be a loss of free will, but then there's also the loss of what it means to be a person. Because part of the problem is with a lot of these people that are involved with the singularity studies is that they do not recognize, obviously, that there's anything like the Imago Dei or the image and likeness of God within humans that stamp, but they believe that we're just matter in motion, essentially. Effectively, there is no soul, there's no mind, there's a reductive materialism. And so from there is no person per se, right? I mean, you have people like Daniel Dennett who will say that consciousness is a bag of tricks. The self is an illusion. And he'll say it's like all these tiny little machineries that are interacting with one another that give the illusion of the self, which is a remarkable thing to say, right? Given that self-aware and reflecting on this, it's a remarkable thought to even have. But the idea behind a lot of these futurologists, like could include Elon Musk and Ray Kurzweil and Clea Irwin, is that the human person is not what has been fundamentally and traditionally understood as being in their mind. And so obviously they already believe there is no free will. So this is just a step into another direction, right? Carrying forward that metaphysics. So
It comes back to the recognition that ideas have consequences. And when we understood humanity as being made in the image of God, then we are concerned about what the human being is. We want to make sure that we're going to protect children, we're going to protect women, we're going to protect individuals so that they can flourish as human beings, be able to participate in society at large and what it means to be part of society, civic organizations. Edmund Burke talked about the little platoons as far as family structure and all the rest. Even when we go back to Aristotle, we got the idea of the polis and the understanding of how society works and the natural flow of things, and being able to understand that an acorn is an acorn. It has its own natural ability to become a tree. We kind of had a very good understanding of how society works, how civilization works. But now we're moving into a realm that is cutting into the very heart of what it means to be human. As our society has, over the last couple of hundred years, been rejecting made in the image of God concepts and the religious background and understanding that we've had as a civilization, certainly here in the West. And now we're going to a very dark place. And it's a place where it's the survival of the fittest, but it's going to be the survival against monsters of our own creation.
I see the whole development, the rapid, devolution, I could say, of the whole gender ideology and the transgender movement. I think that maybe this is even more dangerous than the whole COVID tyranny. And so the transgender movement, the whole idea behind, this non-binarism and the idea that, male could be female, female could be male, is a fundamental attack on what it means to be human. And it was interesting. A friend of mine, actually, my friend who actually studied under Bruce Parody, he was on Facebook, and he still has somebody that I actually went to school with who has gone so far left, so woke that this person can't even realize, basic truths anymore. And he's actually an educator, which is very scary. But I mean, this is a case with a lot of the teachers. They've been ideologically possessed, so to speak, to borrow a term from Jordan Peterson, in terms of the gender ideology or climate change or what have you. But my friend who still keeps in contact with this person actually sent me a post, and I found it fascinating. It was a meme. So there was a slug looking at a butterfly, and the slug was saying to the butterfly, "Oh, you're just a caterpillar." And then at the end of the bottom of the meme, it says, "Well, here we go. This is transphobia." And he says, "Good analogy." So you mentioned about the acorn and Aristotelian metaphysics, that the acorn has the potentiality and then actualizes itself into a tree.
Mm.
It has that embedded in its the informational systems in its code. So the same thing with the butterfly, correct? Is that the caterpillar has the DNA to transform into the butterfly. So it's already encoded. So it's part of its nature. So it's got the potential, and then it's actualized. Whereas a male is a male. It doesn't matter what kind of surgery you do, what kind of mutilations you perform on a male or a female, whether it's a mastectomy or some type of genital mutilation or puberty blockers.
Mm.
There's no potentiality that can be actualized, and that's fundamentally the issue. And it's an issue about truth and logic and science. And so somebody that says that's a good analogy and who's an educator scares me tremendously. I mean, I know that many of the students, in the public school system and even the Catholic school boards here in Ontario are being pummeled with, woke ideologies.
Mm.
And, this is the sad state of affairs in our educational system. From JK to the postdoctoral level, you have these pernicious ideas that keep circulating. And it's kind of like a virus that spreads, right? And it's going to take, a lot of work to nip this in the bud at some point, but it's going to be through a rejuvenation of the culture. And I see that as a very, almost, it seems like right now, an insurmountable hill to climb on top of. But I think, like you said earlier, ideas are things that matter. And so if we keep pushing the correct ideas, the truth, then eventually I think maybe some of the younger generations are becoming a bit skeptical of some of the woke ideologies. Maybe the Generation Z, where you see now there's a student who is I believe he's Protestant, but he was at a Catholic school. At this point, he was arrested several times. But you see
Yeah.
movements like that give us a little bit of hope, where they're questioning the gender ideology, they're questioning the COVID tyranny.
Mm.
So you see kind of a rebellion as well, with the youth from what their parents believe or their educators. And my hope is that, there'll be a restoration of acknowledgement of truth and morality in the public sphere.
Yeah.
But so those types of movements are encouraging, but there's so many steps we've taken backwards that it's going to take a long time. I think maybe a generation or two to get us back on track.
The name of the young man is Josh Alexander. And
That's right.
yeah, I've met him a couple of times, a sharp young man, as well as his brother, Nick. You know, these young men who have certainly stood up in recent days is fascinating to watch it unfold. I see, Scott, that our time has come to an end right now. To me, we've only just started, man. I think we need to.
I kind of wanted to get into some other issues that led me into different directions. And so hopefully we can continue this conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. Any final thoughts here right now on the issue of transhumanism? And I tell you, I think we should do some kind of further study and discussion on that, because it's an issue that we're facing right now. But any final thought before we end right now?
One of the final thoughts I would have is to be very vigilant of technology. I think that technology, taken surface value of technology, is that it can be neutral and it can be can be used for good, and it can be used for evil. But I see the direction that we're going as being used for evil and nefarious purposes. And so I would suggest that people be very vigilant and aware of the platforms they're getting involved in, and the amount of time they spend on social media and on their electronic devices, and to actually appreciate nature more and appreciate relationships with family and friends, and to put aside the technology. I mean, I think that's maybe the greatest power we have, is to shut it off once in a while. So we're not becoming subservient to the technology, and we tell the technology we're still in control.
Excellent. Okay, thank you so much. And yes, we will continue our conversation. So thank you for joining us today. You know, folks, I want to thank you for being with us. I really had no idea that this conversation was going to go into the path of transhumanism, but I'm glad we went there. We only just scratched the surface, as Scott mentioned. You want to come back to listen to our conversation as we continue, because we haven't even yet gotten into Scott's project and the True Freedom Press project, and we will want to be talking about that, as to why he was involved in that, how that came about, and what is it he's trying to achieve. And I just want to thank you for being part of Freedom Feature. You may not agree with the opinions expressed by me or by my guests, but on this program, we want to have open, honest, and transparent dialogue. And I don't know about you, Boyd, but this conversation went by so fast. I want you and encourage you to come back and to listen to part 2. And until next time, I'm Barry Bussey. The fight for freedom consists not only in the legal battles in court, but also in the battle of ideas at the universities and in the media. It takes time, effort, and money to keep on top of the debates for freedom. Your donation allows us to keep fighting for all Canadians. Firstfreedoms.ca